The night felt colder than the weather report had promised. The kind of London cold that slips through your coat, sits behind your ribs and makes every streetlight look distant. You were walking past closed shops, damp pavement shining under orange lamps, buses sighing at the curb, strangers passing with their collars raised, and inside you there was a sentence you had not dared to say out loud. Ya Allah, I am tired of waiting. Not tired of believing, not tired of praying, not tired of trying to do things the right way, but tired of feeling as if every sincere effort returned to you with another locked door. You had made dua for risk, with hands that trembled. You had asked for ease after a season that stretched too long. You had watched people move into homes, marriages, jobs, journeys, and peace while you were still measuring your life in unpaid bills, unfinished conversations, unread messages, and silent tears after Salah. The hardest part was not that life was difficult. The hardest part was that you had tried to remain patient, and still you wondered whether you were being seen. That night, you were not looking for a miracle. You were not expecting the sky to split open or some sudden answer to fall in front of you. You only wanted one small sign that your dua had not disappeared into the cold air, and that is why what happened next did not arrive loudly. It came through footsteps, a stranger, a brief pause at the edge of a crossing, and one sentence that touched a private wound so precisely that your heart became still before your mind could explain it. Sometimes Allah does not first open the door you are begging for. Sometimes He opens your sight, because the danger is not only the delay. The danger is misunderstanding the delay until your heart begins to accuse the one who was protecting it all along. Before that moment, you had started reading your life through the wrong evidence. A rejected application became a proof that you were falling behind. A silent phone became proof that you had been forgotten. A friend's good news, even when you were happy for them, pressed on a hidden bruise inside you. You smiled, said Alhamdulillah, and meant it, but later that night you stared at the ceiling and wondered why your own path kept narrowing. This is where the test becomes subtle, because Shaitan does not always come with obvious rebellion. Sometimes he comes with comparison that feels like logic. He whispers that if Allah loved you, the door would have opened by now. He suggests that your sabr is just passivity, your tawakkul is just delay, and your restraint is the reason you are losing. But yet real faith is not the absence of these thoughts. Real faith is what you do when they come. You still wake for Fajr even when your chest feels heavy. You still refuse haram shortcuts when rent is due. You still hold your tongue when someone speaks carelessly about your situation because you know your pain does not give you permission to become unjust. This is not weakness. This is discipline under pressure. And if this touches something you have lived, let the video be liked quietly, not as a performance, but as a small acknowledgement that patience in private deserves to be witnessed somewhere. The world often applauds the result and ignores the restraint that made the soul clean enough to receive it. Allah sees both. He sees the email you did not send, in anger, the person you did not expose, the temptation you walked away from, the prayer you made when nobody believed you were still trying. There is a kind of mercy that looks at first like obstruction. You ask Allah for an opening, and He closes something that seemed perfect. You ask for companionship, and He reveals a character flaw in someone you were ready to trust. You ask for income, and a path collapses just as you were about to compromise your values to enter it. At the time, it feels like loss layered on loss. You may even feel embarrassed because you had started to hope, and hope makes disappointment sharper. But later, sometimes months later, sometimes years later, you look back and realize the closed door was not empty. It was carrying protection. Maybe the job that rejected you would have demanded a version of you that prayed less, lied more, and slowly called exhaustion ambition. Maybe the relationship that ended would have trained you to beg for basic kindness until you forgot your dignity before Allah. Maybe the opportunity that disappeared had hidden conditions your heart was too desperate to notice. Divine timing is not simply about waiting until something arrives. It is also about being held back until your sight becomes clean enough to recognize what should never enter your life. On that London street, you were still grieving the door. You had not yet understood the protection. You passed a cafe with chairs stacked on tables, a man mopping the floor inside, and for a moment you saw your reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, damp hair, a face older than it should have looked. You almost laughed at yourself, not because anything was funny, but because you had become so used to holding yourself together in public. Then the crossing light changed, and you stepped forward without noticing the cyclist cutting through the red. A hand moved gently in front of you, not forcefully, not dramatically, just enough to stop you. The bike rushed past. The stranger beside you said, "Careful, not every open road is meant for you tonight." It was an ordinary sentence, the kind someone could say without thinking. The man was older, maybe in his late 60s, wearing a dark wool hat and carrying a small paper bag from a corner shop. His accent was soft, his beard white at the edges, his eyes calm in a way that did not demand attention. You thanked him, but your voice came out thinner than expected because those words landed too close to something you had said in sujood the night before. You had asked, "Ya Allah, why does every road open for others and close for me?" Nobody knew that question. You had not written it down. You had not told a friend. You had whispered it into the carpet after Isha while the house was quiet and the city moved on without you. Now, a stranger on a cold street had used the same image, not as a prophecy, not as a spectacle, but as a simple warning after preventing you from stepping into harm. Your body understood before your thoughts did. You felt the old pressure behind your eyes, the pressure of someone who has been strong too long and is suddenly met with gentleness. He did not say, "Everything will happen tomorrow." He did not promise wealth, revenge, marriage, or public victory. He did not speak as if he had access to the unseen. He simply looked at the road, then at you, and said, "Sometimes being stopped is also mercy." Then he crossed when the light changed again, slowly, without looking back. You stood there for a few seconds longer than necessary, the city continuing around you, buses moving, people passing, the cold still sharp. But something inside you had shifted, not solved, not finished, shifted. The answer was not that a stranger had appeared like something from a story. The answer was that Allah had allowed an ordinary moment to touch an unseen place inside you. This is where Basra begins, not as a mystical feeling that makes you superior, but as a cleaner way of seeing. You started walking again, and the same street looked different, not because the street had changed, but because your interpretation had softened. The delay was still there. The bills had not vanished. The application was still rejected. The person who hurt you had not apologized. But the story your mind had built around these things began to weaken. You realized you had been standing before Allah with the manners of someone who trusted him in words but cross-examined him in silence. Every closed door had become an accusation. Every delay had become a verdict. Yet, here was one small scene showing you that being stopped can save you from what you cannot see. You remembered how many times you had been angry about a plan falling apart, only to later hear something that made your skin go cold with gratitude. A workplace you could not enter became known for corruption. A friend group you felt excluded from slowly became a place of gossip and humiliation. A person you cried over later showed a pattern that would have broken you if Allah had let you stay attached. These realizations did not make you proud. They made you quiet, because you understood that Allah's mercy had been present in moments you had labeled abandonment. The chosen path, if we can speak of it carefully, is not a path where Allah proves you are better than others. It is a path where He holds you responsible for what you notice after pain. Will you become bitter, or will you become truthful? Will you turn every wound into suspicion, or will you let hardship refine your judgment? Will you demand that Allah explain Himself before you obey, or will you keep walking with a dab while the explanation is still hidden? Still, a mature heart must be careful here. Not every stranger is a sign. Not every coincidence is a command. Not every emotional moment should be turned into a decision. A believer does not abandon reason and call it tawakkul. A believer does not chase symbols while ignoring Quran, Salah, Halal and Haram, counsel from wise people and the quiet facts in front of them. There was another person you knew who once treated every delay like proof that everyone was against him. He became suspicious of friends who were busy, suspicious of family who gave imperfect advice, suspicious of anyone whose life looked easier. He called it spiritual awareness, but it made him harsh. He stopped listening, stopped apologizing, stopped asking whether his own choices needed correction. That is not basira. That is pain wearing religious language. Allah's guidance does not need paranoia to be powerful. It does not need cruelty to be firm. It does not make you look down on people who misunderstand you. The stranger on the London street did not tell you to distrust the world. He reminded you to trust Allah beyond what the world looked like for a moment. That difference matters. Sabr is not sitting in confusion and refusing to move. Tawakkul is not ignoring effort and waiting for life to rescue you. Dua is not a transaction where you pay with tears and demand a delivery date. The sign was not a license to become passive. It was an invitation to become steadier. After that night, you still had to update your CV, answer messages, seek advice, manage your spending, pray on time, and make choices that aligned with what you were asking Allah to bless. The mercy was not that all responsibility disappeared. The mercy was that responsibility no longer felt like proof you were alone. In the days after, the sign continued working on you through small changes that nobody else would have noticed. Someone made a careless joke about your situation, and for the first time you did not rush to defend yourself, not because you had no answer, but because your heart did not need that courtroom anymore. You received another rejection email, and although it hurt, it did not pull you into the same spiral. You made wudu slowly, prayed 2 rak'ahs, and asked Allah to place your feet where your deen would remain safe. A message from an old contact arrived about work that was not glamorous, not the kind of opportunity people announce proudly, but it was clean, manageable, and enough to begin breathing again. You did not call it your final destination. You called it provision for the step you were on. And that is how risk often arrives, not always as the dramatic thing your ego imagined, but as the lawful next piece that keeps you moving without selling your soul. You began noticing patterns you had been too wounded to see. The days you guarded your prayer, your mind was clearer. The conversations you avoided out of restraint saved you from unnecessary regret. The nights you slept after making dua instead of replaying every insult gave your body a mercy it had been begging for. You were not suddenly untouched by sadness. You still had moments when loneliness sat beside you like a second shadow, but loneliness no longer convinced you that Allah was absent. Sometimes, before clarity, Allah allows the noise around you to fall away so you can finally hear what your life is becoming. That emptiness can feel like rejection when it is actually separation from the voices that would have dragged you into decisions made from fear. There is a question worth asking, because it can reveal more than 100 explanations. What ordinary moment in your life once felt small, but later carried the weight of guidance? Share that one moment in the comments if you can name it honestly. Not to impress anyone, but to remember that Allah's mercy often reaches us through things we almost overlook. It might have been a sentence from a taxi driver, a child asking a question that exposed your impatience, a train delay that kept you from a meeting you later realized was harmful, a friend calling at the exact minute you were about to break, or a verse heard from another room while you were pretending to be fine. These moments do not replace revelation, and they do not make us owners of the unseen. They simply remind the heart that Allah is aware of the private places no human being can enter. The believer on that street did not build a life around the stranger. They built a new understanding around the mercy that reached them through him. That distinction kept the heart safe, because when people become obsessed with signs, they can start chasing emotional proof every day, and then faith becomes unstable. But when a sign returns you to prayer, humility, lawful effort, patience, and better judgment. It has served its purpose. It does not need to become a spectacle. Sometimes the holiest thing you can do after a powerful moment is make Fajr on time, send the honest email, apologize where you were wrong, refuse the shortcut, eat something warm, and sleep without accusing Allah of neglect. Spiritual awakening is often quieter than we expect. It may look like a person who once reacted to everything now pausing before speaking. It may look like someone deleting a message that would have reopened a wound. It may look like a heart finally admitting, "I do not understand this yet, but I will not let confusion make me disobedient."